Okay, so picture this. On one single day in January, a frankly shocking amount of wealth just vanished from the global markets. But where did it all go? We're going to piece this puzzle together, and trust me, the answer is probably not what you're thinking.
$4.5 trillion. That's our mystery. I mean, just think about that number. That's the value that got completely wiped out. And to figure out how, we've got to follow the money. So let's start with the usual suspects.
Right. So when you hear market crash, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Wall Street, right? The stock market. So that's exactly where our investigation is going to start. Was this whole thing caused by a massive stock market liquidation?
Okay, so the stock market definitely took a hit. I mean, the S&P 500 lost about $360 billion, the Nasdaq dropped $220 billion, and the Dow was down around $95 billion. Now, don't get me wrong, those are huge, huge numbers, but are they big enough to solve our multi-trillion-dollar mystery?
So if we add all of that up, the big U.S. stock indices, they account for, roughly $600 billion of the damage? Again, a massive figure. But it's just a tiny fraction of that $4.5 trillion we're looking for. We are nowhere close. We're still missing most of the story here.
All right, so if the stock market doesn't tell the whole story, where do we look next? Well, the next logical suspect has to be the crypto market, right? We all know how volatile that world can be. It's famous for these insane swings. So maybe that's our missing piece?
Well, nope. Not even close. The entire crypto market lost about $160 billion that day. And look, that was a really painful day for crypto investors, for sure. But in the grand scheme of our $4.5 trillion problem, it barely even moves the needle.
Okay, so let's recap. We've looked at the markets that grab all the headlines. Stocks, crypto, and when you put them together, they account for less than $1 trillion in losses. Which brings us to the big question. Where on earth did the other $3.5 trillion just evaporate from?
You know, the answer isn't in the new, flashy world of digital assets or high-flying tech stocks. Nope, it's in one of the oldest, most ancient stores of value known to humanity. This is where the real story of that day happened.
There it is. Almost $3.5 trillion. That's the value that was wiped out from a single asset, gold. Just that one thing. This single number, it accounts for almost our entire mystery.
And here's the part that's kind of wild. To get a loss that big, you'd think the price must have totally cratered, right? But gold's price only dropped by about 9%. Now, 9% doesn't sound catastrophic on its own, but when you apply that percentage to the sheer volume of all the gold ever mined, we're talking about 7 billion ounces, the result is this absolutely colossal $3.5 trillion loss. It's all about the scale.
Okay, so we've cracked the what and the where. We know what happened. Now we've got to get to the why. What on earth was going on that day to trigger this massive cascade across stocks, crypto, and of course, precious metals?
Well, for stocks and crypto, it was kind of a perfect storm of little things. You had some mixed corporate earnings reports that made people nervous. There was some uncertainty around Federal Reserve nominations, and you saw a lot of money flowing out of crypto ETFs. It all just created this general risk-off mood, a feeling where investors just want to sell and avoid risk.
But the story for gold, that was totally different. First off, the US dollar was getting really strong, which basically makes gold more expensive for anyone buying with other currencies. But on top of that, gold had recently hit some new highs, and a ton of investors just decided, you know what, it's time to cash out. So you had massive profit-taking, with people rotating that money into other places. That 1-2 punch is what created the perfect storm for this historic sell-off.
All right, so we've looked at all the individual pieces of this crazy puzzle. Now let's take a step back and see the whole picture of what this truly extraordinary day in the markets looked like.
Honestly, this one chart tells you pretty much everything you need to know. Just look at that bar for precious metals. It absolutely dwarfs the losses from global stocks and crypto combined. It's not even a competition. The entire story of the day, the whole narrative, was driven by this one massive, massive move. And here's the final scorecard, just to lay it all out. You can see the percentage drops and the actual value lost right next to each other. And what's really interesting here is silver. It had a staggering 27% drop. But because the total gold market is so immense, its much smaller 9.2% decline had that outsized multi-trillion-dollar impact on the world. So what's the big takeaway from all this? I think it's a really powerful reminder. The markets that make the most noise, stocks, crypto, all the stuff we see on the news every day, they aren't always the ones with the most weight. That silent, immense scale of a traditional asset like gold can move the entire financial world in ways we just don't see coming.
And that really leaves us with a final, kind of unsettling thought, doesn't it? Gold is supposed to be the ultimate safe haven, right? The bedrock of stability. So if $3.5 trillion of that bedrock can basically crumble in a single day, it really forces you to ask, in our modern, super interconnected economy, what does stability even mean anymore?